Good morning, everyone. I'm Poppy Harlow. John Berman is off today. Thanks so much for joining us. President Trump takes the stage this hour. He will speak at CPAC, the nation's premier gathering for conservative leaders and activists. We'll bring you those comments live as soon as they begin. But we do begin this morning with exclusive reporting from CNN on the Trump White House and a very unusual request that is raising eyebrows. Sources tell us the administration wanted the FBI to publicly dismiss reports of contact between Russian officials and Trump campaign advisors before the election. Now, the president responding this morning on Twitter. We'll have what he said in just a moment. But first, let's go straight to our justice correspondent, Pamela Brown, who's been working her sources all day and night breaking this news. Pam, what can you tell us?
Well, Poppy, CNN is told by multiple sources that the FBI rejected a request from the White House recently to publicly knock down media reports about communications during the 2016 presidential campaign between Donald Trump's associates and Russians known to U.S. intelligence. But a White House official said that the request was made only after the FBI indicated to the White House it did not believe all of the reporting was accurate. Now, multiple U.S. officials telling CNN the White House sought the help of the Bureau and other agencies investigating the Russia matter to say that the reports were wrong and that there had been no contacts, the officials said. FBI Director James Comey responded by rejecting this request, according to sources, in part because the alleged communications are the subject of an ongoing investigation. And the White House spokesperson Sean Spicer said, "We didn't try to knock the story down. We asked them to tell the truth." The FBI declined to comment. Poppy.
But Pamela, this is not a typical request at all. How did it all begin?
It is not a typical request. This began with FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe and White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus on the sidelines of a separate White House meeting on the day after the stories were published. A White House official says McCabe told Priebus that the New York Times story vastly overstated what the FBI knows about the contacts. A U.S. official says McCabe didn't discuss specific aspects of the case, but wouldn't say exactly what McCabe told Priebus. The White House official said that Priebus later reached out, and again to McCabe and to the FBI Director James Comey, asking for the FBI to at least talk to reporters on background to dispute the stories. The FBI refused, and again, it's worth noting that they didn't just reach out to the FBI, they also reached out to other agencies in an effort to publicly knock down the reporting.
Right, which ultimately didn't happen. So had Reince Priebus going on the Sunday shows saying it himself. But Pam,
between the White House and the FBI, limiting those discussions only when it is important for the president's duties and where appropriate from a law enforcement perspective. Now, if the Deputy Director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe, said this to the White House, he may have overstepped since it is an ongoing investigation, not to mention an investigation involving the president's associates and Russia. The request from the White House is a violation of procedures that limit communications with the FBI on pending investigations, Poppy.
Yeah, right. And this is an investigation that's still ongoing.
It is very much still ongoing in the FBI's counterintelligence division. They are investigating the contacts between Trump associates during the campaign as well as Russia. Also, the House and Senate Intelligence Committees tell CNN that Congress is still investigating those alleged contacts. That has already begun, and they're starting to collect documents and records. So these investigations are in full swing, Poppy.
Yeah, absolutely. Pamela Brown, stay with us because we have some more breaking news. I'm going to take you to the White House where we're getting some reaction finally directly from the White House on all of this. That's where we find our Joe Johns. What are you hearing, Joe?
Well, senior administration officials briefed reporters just a little while ago, and I think the overall takeaway, number one, is they say they did nothing wrong, and they do accuse CNN of trying to make a situation look nefarious when they say it was not nefarious at all. And much of the recounting of the conversations as detailed in CNN's reporting you just heard from Pamela Brown, the White House has spoken on background suggests that Reince Priebus, the chief of staff, was having a conversation with a group of individuals about intelligence, an unrelated matter, and at the end of that conversation, Mr. McCabe, the deputy director, pulled Reince Priebus aside and essentially told Mr. Priebus, according to these administration officials, that the story in the New York Times, as relates to constant contacts involving the Russians, was, quote, BS. And the response from Reince Priebus, according to the accounting we got today, he told McCabe in one word or another, well, what can we do about it? And the message back to Mr. Priebus was the FBI cannot get engaged in responding to every news story, because that's essentially all the FBI would be doing. After a series of additional conversations, it was determined that it would be okay for Reince Priebus to say that he'd been briefed by FBI officials, or words to that effect, and that they had told him the story in the New York Times was not true. So the White House strongly denies trying to apply influence or pressure on the FBI on this, and also takes issue with the question of whether they were actually even trying to influence an investigation at all. They say they weren't trying to influence an investigation. They were simply trying to get out in front of a news story after it had already happened. So I think those are the finer points. As to the question that Pam Brown raised in her reporting just a minute ago about the decades-old policy that pretty much puts a firewall between the White House and the FBI, they say there's a carve-out there for public affairs. So, and the other point they continue to make is they were talking about shooting down a news story, not shooting down an investigation, even though the fact of the matter is, and I raised this point, if the FBI had come out and shot down the New York Times story, they would have had to make a substantive statement about the investigation. The takeaway from that is something the FBI would have had to deal with.
Important reporting and reaction now that we're getting from the White House. Joe Johns, thank you very much for that. The president, as I mentioned a little bit ago this morning, taking to Twitter, hitting leakers within the intelligence community about all of this exclusive CNN reporting. Here's what he tweeted. The FBI is totally unable to stop the national security leakers that have permeated our government for a long time. They can't even find the leakers within the FBI itself. Classified information is being given to media that could have a devastating effect on the United States. Find now, meaning I think find the leakers now. Let's talk about all of this, and then we'll get some more other CNN exclusive reporting from our Pamela Brown in just a moment. Juliette Kayyem is with me, our national security analyst and former assistant secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and Norm Eisen joins us, former White House ethics czar under former President Obama. Nice to have you both here. Juliette, let me go to you first. So the president's hitting back on Twitter to the leakers, not to the substance of CNN's exclusive reporting. He is saying, look, people are leaking this. It is a danger to the United States. Just explain to the American people why it matters so much if indeed this is the action that CNN has multiple sources reporting that took place between the White House and the FBI.
So the call itself by the White House to the FBI, even if they claim that it only had to do with, the PR aspects of it, clearly when to this White House, the ties or collusiveness between Trump and potentially his people and Russia during the campaign. The idea that that call would even happen was at best to get dangerously close to facts about an investigation ongoing. It just breaks not just guidelines, but, and I will say on Trump's point, McCabe should have never said anything to the chief of staff in that meeting, even if it was innocuous. Everyone needs to stop talking.
Norm Eisen, in your position running the ethics office in the Obama White House, I mean, what do you make of Sean Spicer's argument, the White House pushing back and saying, look, we didn't do anything wrong. He said, quote, we didn't try to knock a story down. We asked them, the FBI, to tell the truth. How do you see it?
Poppy, good morning. Thanks for having me. Good morning, Juliet. I think that it's very concerning, and the explanation that we just heard, that this was a conversation at the end of a meeting between the Chief of Staff and the representative, does not give me any comfort whatsoever. The right answer from the White House should have been, there are clear rules that prohibit communications about investigations. This, if it had happened in the Obama, related to a newspaper is not applicable here. If there's an investigation ongoing, you are not supposed to talk about it. It's the first thing that I briefed our White House officials on, and we have an independent party look at it. I think the DOJ IG should have a look at it. I think bipartisan members of Congress should have a look at it. Let's figure out what's going on. And Donald Trump's attacking the leakers is wrong. He should be saying, let's get to the bottom of whether rules were broken by my own people.
Right. Well, this is a trend we've seen from the president, going after the leakers, not the substance of what was leaked. We'll get to that in a moment. I do want to bring in our Justice correspondent, though, Pamela Brown, again, because she's been breaking this news. With our colleagues. Pamela, to this, what the White House is pointing to, this sort of carve out in these guidelines, do they have justification for that? Does their argument make sense?
So I've just been reading through the memos again, and essentially there is an allowance for basically trying to say this was an article, this was a news story, this wasn't, we're not trying to shoot down an investigation, but essentially, no matter how you look at it, this is about an investigation. And it's an investigation involving Trump's associates. President Trump's associates during the campaign and alleged contacts with the Russians. And so these memos from 2007 and 2009 preclude any interaction between a White House chief's duty. So if it's important enough where it applies to the president's duties, or it is a law enforcement sensitive matter and it must be discussed. But even that aside, it is very specific